Alright guys, how's it going? Welcome back. Today I'm in this 2016 Volkswagen Scirocco. I think the Scirocco is quite an interesting car. I've always rated them. So I thought today we'd take one out, see what it was like, and figure out whether you should buy one or not. The first VW Scirocco was launched way back in the 70s. That ran until the early 80s, then it was replaced with the Mark II model, which ran until the early 90s. Then the model was just put on the back burner for almost 2 decades. This generation was launched in 2008 and ran all the way until 2017. Underneath the quirky and attractive body styling is a very dreary Mark VI Golf, which is very boring and sensible, but it's about as reliable as a park bench. So when you think of it like that, it's a bit of a win-win. It's the best of both worlds. You get attractive styling, but the underpinnings of a very reliable car. Under the bonnet is a 1.4 litre turbocharged petrol. Now that's turbocharged and supercharged, so it produces 125 horsepower, which isn't going to win any awards, let's be honest, but it doesn't do a bad job. This has a 0 to 60 time of just under 10 seconds. I think it's 9.6 or 9.7, which does sound a little bit pedestrian, I know. I think my grandmother's motorised scooter can do it in a quicker time than that. But the way that it delivers the power, with the supercharger and the turbocharger, means that it feels more dramatic. It does feel quicker than a 9.6 to 60 time suggests. This one's mated to a 6-speed manual gearbox. They also offered it with a DSG automatic, but I would stick with the manual, it's far better. I've never been a fan of those DSGs. The inside is really quite cool. It doesn't feel like you're in a Golf, it feels like you're in something quite sporty and unique. The doors are pillarless, which I always think is a good start. I mean, have you ever met anyone who doesn't like a frameless door? No, I don't think they exist. I mean, yes, you will recognise some VW switches and buttons, but everything just feels sportier and more youthful than a standard VW. I mean, take the interior door handles for example. They just look really cool. They could have made them much more straightforward than that, but they didn't. Instead, they went with something that looks like it should be at home in a museum for modern art. The choice of materials that they've used is very clever. It's quite a good mixture, which just means that it's a little bit more interesting to look at than acres of cheap-looking plastics. I like the fact that they've textured the plastic around the horn here, and here all over the centre console. No, it's just quite a nice place to sit. While we're still talking about the interior, I think the infotainment screen is brilliant. The clarity of the display is just excellent. It's so crisp. I think the steering wheel design's brilliant. It's just the perfect thickness. It's not too thick, not too thin. It feels nice and sporty. The actual steering does feel a little bit on the light side, but it's not too bad. You've also got a flat bottom as well, which helps to its sporty feel. Just everything that you touch and look at feels like it's been well made. Typical VW, really. This being the sporty version, you also get these 3 gauges here which tell you things that you will have zero interest in, to be honest, but they look cool, so I'll excuse it that. You've got things like, it tells you how many bars of pressure your turbo is producing, the temperature of your oil there, and the centre I think is a stopwatch. Like I say, completely pointless, but it looks cool. Overall though, the interior just feels sporty and youthful. Youthful but not juvenile, just trendy I suppose. Although that word makes me sound like an old fogey, doesn't it? Very trendy in here, very trendy bar. It's got all the mod cons. Anyway, it is quite a trendy car. They do a few different engine choices as well. Now I would personally go for a petrol. But if you do want to save yourself a few £100 a year, you could opt for one with the engine from a tugboat, which sounds dreadful to be honest, but they are very efficient and cheap to tax too. If you want to sit there at every red light vibrating with that noisy diesel drone just to save yourself a few £100 a year, then be my guest. You might actually quite like it, especially if you're a girl. They also do a 2 litre R version, or known in these parts as the Scirocco R, as in, yeah, what's your kid driving these days? Still got his ST, yeah? Nah, I sold it, mate. Got a Scirocco R. Now, I imagine the R model is brilliant to drive. They look good, sound good, nearly 300 horsepower. But beware, because if you buy one, I guarantee, as sure as I'm sat here, it will be stolen off your driveway. And then it will be used to ram through the plate glass window of your local NISA. Anything with an R badge on is just a magnet for car thieves and criminals. It's a shame, you might think I'm being a snob, but it's true. I just wouldn't want to run the risk of somebody breaking into my house to nick my keys, or dragging me out of it while I'm at a stop sign. So, like I say, this 125 horsepower model isn't the quickest thing in the world, but now as I join the bypass in 3rd gear, behind an old Mondeo that I think is powered by coal. It's plenty quick enough, actually. They do an even quicker version of this 1.4, but honestly, this is adequate. It's a 6-speed too, so if you sat here at 70 miles an hour in 6th gear, you're only doing just over 2,000 RPM, which means you'll average around 46, 48 miles per gallon on a motorway. That figure around town goes down to about 36, 37, but still quite a cheap car to run. So what's it like to drive? Well, it's pretty good actually. It's quite good fun. It handles brilliantly, it's really sharp, really agile. I mean, at the end of the day, it's front wheel drive and it is only a 1.4 litre engine, so, you know, don't expect it to be an Audi R8. But yeah, it's good enough for this kind of car. The ride is a little bit stiffer than you'll find in a VW Golf, as you might expect, but it's not uncomfortable by any means. It's certainly not a 1 Series BMW M Sport. I'm sat here at 70 miles an hour, there's not much wind or road noise. There's no whistling from the pillarless doors. It's all quite civilised, really. The seats are very comfortable and very supportive. They pin you into them here because they're almost buckety. You've got a centre armrest here too, so it's quite comfortable if you're going on a longer trip. Because it's a sporty little car, the boot isn't, well, it's not what you'd call spacious. It's okay, but it's not as practical as a Golf. Same goes for visibility. There isn't an awful lot of it, but again, you'd expect that with a sporty little car like this. Up front, there's plenty of headroom, plenty of legroom. It doesn't feel like I'm trapped in some low-slung little sports car. You get plenty of little storage compartments too. You get one here, you get a couple of cup holders, and you even get a, let me see if I can get it out, you even get a bottle opener. The glove compartment's not a bad size, you get a couple of door pockets. The only one little area where, well, it is a little area, is under here, under this centre armrest. It's tiny. It's big enough for my wallet and a set of keys, and that's it. As for the space in the back, well, there isn't any. There isn't much anyway. It's alright if you've stood on a landmine, but for everybody else, it's just not all that spacious back there. There's not much headroom either because the roof slopes down slightly. Running costs across the board are quite low. As I mentioned before, from this 1.4 litre petrol you get 36, 38 miles per gallon around town. If you opt for a diesel, you'll get 42, 44 miles per gallon around town, so they are really quite frugal to run. You could run one of these on a shoestring. Servicing costs aren't expensive. The petrols are chain driven, so there's no belts to be replaced. The diesels do require a new cam belt every 5 years, so factor that in. That'll cost you around 300 quid. At the same time as replacing your cam belt, you should get the water pump replaced because they're driven from the belt, but they're only 15 quid. The road tax here in the UK, depending which model you go for, they're all quite low, so none are going to break the bank. So prices for used Sciroccos here in the UK start at around £3,000. But for that sort of money, you're going to get a right nail. So I would double that budget, because for between 6 and 7, you'll get yourself a half decent one. If your budget will stretch even further to this, for example, this one's for sale for around £15,000 and it's only done 24,000 miles. This is a 2016 model. I personally would recommend going for at least a 2014 because that's when they facelifted the model. So you get a nicer infotainment system, a few tweaks styling wise. Overall, just everything gets a little bit better. Interestingly, and unfortunately if you're an American, they never sold this car in the USA, which I think is a missed opportunity. The theory was that if they sold the Scirocco over there, it would take sales from the Golf. But they'd still end up buying a VW, whether it's a Scirocco or a Golf, so I just can't understand the logic there, but anyway, it never sold there. They also never made a shooting brake version, which I think is a missed opportunity because it would have been quite an interesting car. Now's the time where I'd normally tell you of a few things that I've found which just annoy me, things that I just couldn't live with, but there aren't any. It's quite a good car, this. It's time for the big question then, should you buy one? Would I buy one? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely I would. I can't think of a reason why I wouldn't. It's good looking, fun to drive, quick enough, sporty enough, practical enough. Yeah, what more could you want? I know it's basically a hatchback, but it doesn't feel like a boring, dreary, sensible hatchback. And yet underneath that's basically what you get. So you get sensible, boring hatchback running costs. If I was a sensible person, I'd definitely consider one. It's got enough about it to make you stand out from the crowd, but it won't leave you bankrupt. As far as alternatives go, there's the Audi A3, which is bland. There's the Golf, boring. There's the BMW 1 Series, but I've never been a big fan. Apart from the fact they look like a bread van, I just don't like the ride. It's too firm, too stiff. So yeah, that wouldn't be an option for me. What else? There's really not an awful lot else out there to compare it to. Oh, there's the Hyundai Veloster, I suppose. You don't see many of those. That's a similar style, actually. So yeah, maybe a Veloster. I've never had one, so I can't possibly comment. You see, there just aren't that many choices. Thanks once again for watching. Make sure you give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't done already. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'll leave the link below. Yeah, if you've got any comments or questions, let me know, and I'll do my very best to get back to you. So yeah, cheers guys. I'll see you next time.